Well, good morning everybody. It's now 10 o'clock, so it is time for us to open the hearing sessions into the examination of the submitted Crawley Borough Local Plan. Before we proceed with the opening statement, can I just check, can everybody hear me and when necessary see me okay? Yep, good, thank you. Just to introduce ourselves as the inspectors, my name is David Spencer. I'm alongside here with my colleague, Mr. Glenn Rawlings. We are the inspectors appointed by the Secretary of State under Section 20 of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004 to carry out the independent examination of the submitted Crawley Borough Local Plan, which sets out the Council's strategy and policies for meeting the borough's development needs to 2040. Can I, at this early stage, ask people to ensure that mobile phones are switched off or on their silent modes, please? I understand the Council is recording these sessions, but can I understand for this morning, does anybody else wish to make their own recording or further recording? No. And can I just inquire, is there anybody here this morning from the local press? No. Okay. Now, most people will have met or at least spoken to Charlotte Glancy, who's seated on my left, who is the Programme Officer dealing with the administration for the examination. Just to remind everybody, Charlotte is completely independent and works for the examination. She is your first point of contact if you've got any queries about the procedures for the hearing sessions or the examination generally. You should also contact Charlotte if you wish to locate any of the documents relevant to the examination, all of which are on the examination website. Charlotte will be here in the Borough Council offices whilst the hearing sessions are sitting, and otherwise her contact details, if you do not have them, are on the examination website. Now, before we continue with our formal opening session, I think I now pass over to Charlotte, who has to sort of give us some general housekeeping rules. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to the Crawley Borough Council's local plan examination hearing. There is no scheduled fire drills. So in the event of a fire alarm sounding, please leave the building via the main spiral staircase and through the main entrance doors. Once outside, please turn left and make your way to the fire assembly point located beyond the Town Hall multi-storey car park on Exchange Road. If you're unable to use the stairs, please wait in the chamber and you'll be guided by a member of staff to the evacuation lift. These meetings are being filmed and recorded to be later uploaded on the Council's YouTube site. You should be aware that the Council is a data controller under the Data Protection Act. Data collected during webcasts will be retained in accordance with the Council's published policy, and these specific meetings will be retained for at least 2 years. Any individual seated around the chamber and in the public gallery will be filmed by the automated camera system, and your image may be captured. Therefore, by entering the meeting room, you are consenting to being filmed and to the possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. Please take notice of what's displayed on the screens in the room, as these show what is being recorded. The microphone positions are, they've been set to your seat, so if you could keep them fixed, they're quite sensitive, so you don't need to move them, and if you move your seat too much, you might not appear in the camera. The ideal position is an arm's length away with the microphone at the edge of the desk. Also, if you can not unplug the mics that are plugged in, because it's the daisy chain of all the mics for everybody's mics on that row, and the mics won't work. Anyway, many thanks. Bye bye. Oh, and toilets are the public toilets, I believe, are out this way to the right. Is that right?
Yeah, the men's is through the door and on the right, and the ladies is through the door to the left.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. We now will proceed with further with our sort of formal opening before we invite the Borough Council to make an opening statement if they wish. So just to remind everybody here this morning, in terms of our role, is to conduct the examination. In conducting the examination, is to determine whether the submitted Crawley Borough Local Plan satisfies relevant legal and procedural requirements under the 2004 Act and associated regulations, whether the Council has complied with the duty to cooperate, and whether the submitted plan is sound. And as I'm sure everybody is aware, to be sound, the plan must be positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy. And the starting point for the examination is that the Borough Council has submitted what it considers to be a sound plan. Now, there's a set of guidance notes which sets out or explains more about the examination. We've identified a number of matters and issues to be explored through these hearings. Our matters and issues have focused primarily on the representations made in May and June of this year, on the last published submission version of the plan, and the evidence that the Council has produced in support of its plan. We've also had regard to representations that were made in 2020 and 2021 on previous iterations of the plan intended for submission. The hearing sessions which start today will be based on these matters and issues which we have identified, and the hearing sessions will also reflect the written statements submitted in early November in response to our matters and issues. We will lead the discussions based on agendas which we have recently released and published. Now, the plan which was submitted for examination was submitted on the 31st of July of this year. On submission of the plan, the Council presented a number of modifications it wishes to make to the plan, and these are presented in document CBC CLP 07. That document has been subsequently updated, and the latest version, which is on the website, can be found under reference version D of that document. Now, it may well transpire that further main modifications will need to be discussed at these hearing sessions. We will be discussing the next steps for the examination in an administrative session with the Council at the end of the Part 2 hearing sessions, and the agenda for that session will likely discuss any process around main modifications and how they will be consulted upon. Can we please ask that the Council keeps a running schedule through these hearings of any changes that it either proposes, supports or has no objection to as we go along? We will also be keeping a record, and we'll coordinate with the Council through Charlotte, the Programme Officer, on any final schedule of proposed modifications. Thank you. I'll now hand over at this point to my colleague, Mr. Rollings. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? Great, thank you. Hopefully you'll have seen the program that we've produced for the hearing sessions. It's been updated with everybody participating up to now. That may change depending if we get any late notifications. You'll have noticed that the hearing sessions take place over two parts. The first part is this week, and we'll be looking at the more strategic aspects of the plan. When we resume in early January, we'll be looking at specific policies and proposals. We are aware that the submitted plan follows a relatively recently adopted local plan in 2015, and so the various parts of the plan that have previously been found sound in the context of reasonably consistent national policy we'll only be touching on. We're also mindful that matters are progressing in terms of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023 and also the anticipated update to the National Planning Policy Framework that's going to come through at some time. We probably know as much as you do on that, but if there are any significant changes that are made during this examination process, we will take stock and either invite comment from the Borough Council and others on the way forward, and make clear in our report that it would be a subsequent development plan document to respond to any legislative or NPPF changes. The starting point for the examination is that the Council submitted at the end of July what it considered to be a sound plan. consistent with national policy at that time. Participants attending these hearing sessions will be able to speak. Following the close of the hearing sessions, we'll prepare a report to the Council. We intend to announce at the end of the final hearing session when our report is likely to be submitted, taking into account the potential need for any additional work and consultation on any main modifications. In the morning, sessions will normally start at about 10 o'clock. The afternoon sessions will start at 2 o'clock. We'll aim to finish at around 5. We may go over slightly if there's a point that needs to be finished on the day, but we'd prefer to finish at 5 or even before, if not beforehand. We'll be seeking to accommodate mid-morning and afternoon breaks. We must stress that all participants should be seated and ready to begin at the allocated time and return promptly from breaks. That would be appreciated. Thank you. We intend that these hearing sessions will be relaxed, fairly informal, and the discussions will focus on the particular matter being considered. You'll see that we've prepared agendas for today's sessions and each subsequent session. We'll be asking a series of questions from our agendas and asking the Council to and others to contribute as appropriate. The emphasis of the examination is whether the submitted plan is sound, and if not, what changes should be made in order for it to be sound. A sound plan cannot be made more sound. It's either sound or it isn't. And where there are legal issues of compliance, justification, effectiveness and consistency with national policy, are they repairable? In terms of format, we'll be looking to give everybody adequate opportunities to speak if they wish to do so. We'll be using the upended Toblerone system, so we've tested your nameplates. They seem to be sturdy enough to stand up on end, and for those of you who haven't participated in a local plan hearing before, if there's any issue that we're covering at that time and you wish to speak, please put your nameplate up like this and we'll know that you're ready to speak. And you will have the opportunity to do so. We are aware that some participants may not be used to these sorts of events. We will try to make sure that everybody is able to contribute and make their case. We'd like to advise everybody as well to bear in mind that your written representations and statements carry equal weight to what we hear in this room. We'd be grateful if all contributions to these hearings are to the point, and in particular identify how the plan should be changed to address a point of soundness or legal compliance. For the benefit of the Council and everybody else participating, we'd like to advise that we have visited the Borough. We visited last week for an informal site visit. We visited all the proposed sites, employment sites and housing sites, and other sites that are being implemented from the 2015 local plan. We got a general feel for the area. We looked at all the different character areas. We particularly liked the colour-coded street signs for the different character areas. They were very helpful, thank you. We had a look around Gatwick and existing employment locations as well. If there's anything raised during these discussions, we'll revisit locations that we've had a look at as well. We're also open to suggestion to revisit various places if any of the parties feel that it's necessary and we feel that we haven't seen everything that we need to based on our subsequent discussions. We anticipate that, as our site visit last week, that they can be done on an unaccompanied basis. That concludes our initial announcements. Are there any brief questions on the mechanics of how things will work? Great, thank you. We'd like to offer the Council an opportunity to make a brief opening statement if it so wishes.
Thank you. We would like to make an opening statement. Can you hear me okay, all of you? Thank you. Councillor Latif Nawaz, I am a Cabinet Member for Planning and Economic Development. First of all, welcome to Crawley Borough Council's new Town Hall. Thank you to all for your interest in our local plan, and thank you to the inspectors for your detailed assessment of it. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all those who have supported us in bringing the local plan forward. It has been a long process with very unusual challenges, including a global pandemic and new requirement for water neutrality, but we have preserved and submitted a plan. Thanks to all representatives for your patience and staying with us throughout the process. The plan subject to examination today was submitted on 31st of July, as earlier mentioned, in line with our local development scheme. It's a full review of the adopted local plan, and once adopted, will replace the 2015 local plan in its entirety. It has been consulted on at each key stage of its preparation, which is in accordance with our Statement of Community Involvement and Planning Regulations. The plan was approved by the Crawley Full Council in February this year for publication and submission. The local plan is fully legally compliant and is supported by a full sustainability appraisal, which includes the strategic environment assessments and equality impact assessments. We are grateful for the close working relationship built over many years with our neighbouring authorities, particularly in northern West Sussex and with West Sussex County Council. Thank you for attending with us today and for your ongoing cooperation in preparation for our plan, including the commissioning of joint evidence which has benefited us all. The plan addresses various key challenges for the borough, including maximising housing delivery on a small borough with a very constrained housing land supply. We have taken positive steps to increase density. We have taken care to establish a policy approach which ensures character is protected whilst housing delivery is maximised, and the needs of various groups are met, including older people and those in need of affordable housing. We greatly appreciate the understanding of Crawley's unmet housing need from our neighbouring authorities. We value hugely their support in agreeing statements of common ground. These confirm that the Council will together continue to take opportunities to find solutions to maximising housing supply within housing market area. The statements of common ground also confirm that our neighbouring authorities will engage with us with regard to strategic development on Crawley's boundaries. Collectively, with authorities in the Sussex North Water Resource Zone, we have tackled the unprecedented requirement of water neutrality. We recognise Crawley is the first local plan where a water neutrality policy is to be examined. Our successful joint working with the other authorities on this policy has been commended by Natural England. We consider that this cooperation has been critical to achieving the policy, and together with our thorough evidence, this is very much justifies the approach being taken. Despite the huge challenge presented by water neutrality, I'm proud to say that Crawley Borough Council is continuing to deliver houses in Crawley, particularly much needed affordable homes. This is particularly through the proactive work with Crawley Homes, who are already delivering a significant offset program within the borough, which is achieving robust water savings to help unlock water neutral new resident development. This is acting as a trailblazer for the wider offsetting program, which we are making very good progress towards. Another unique challenge the local plan aims to address is striking a balance between the need to comply with national aviation policy, the requirement to continue to safeguard for a longer-term potential future southern runway in perhaps 30 years' time, and the clear pressing market need in the here and now for the logistics sector and its employment in Crawley. The plan also includes policies to seek to control the impacts of an expanding international airport within the borough. Our local plan seeks to address more familiar planning challenges. These include policies to help mitigate and adapt to climate change, promote the district energy network, regenerate the town centre, promote biodiversity net gain, and support sustainable transport, as well as policies which seek to protect the heritage, open space, and natural assets of the borough. The plan seeks to meet Crawley's development needs as far as it can, whilst at the same time, and very importantly, ensuring the appropriate infrastructures also delivered. Local plan policies do require developers to make proportionate and appropriate contributions to support necessary infrastructure improvements. These finances can be effectively combined with funding from other parties, such as County Council, statutory undertakers, together with other funding. the Borough Council has successfully secured through the programmes such as Town Funds and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This will help ensure that viable development can be delivered alongside necessary infrastructure enhancements and regeneration. In turn, this will ensure the borough will continue to grow sustainably. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to commend our local plan to you. I'm sure my officers will help you in any way possible to answer the questions you have about the approach we have taken in the plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That now concludes the various kind of formal announcements at agenda items 1 and 2 for this morning's session. So we're now going to move on to the first sort of substantive item for this plan examination, which relates to the duty to cooperate. Before we do that, I think it would be benefit both Mr. Rollings and myself if we understand who's going to be contributing to this session. So it's an opportunity to everybody to test their microphones, who's going to be speaking. I'd like to start on my right to understand who'll be speaking or assisting the examination this morning on behalf of the Borough Council. Then we'll move around for the other authorities, and then I'll come round to the left side of the room. So if we can start with the Borough Council first, please.
Yes, I'm Sally LePage, the Strategic Planning Manager for the Council. To my left is Elizabeth Brigden, our Planning Policy Manager, and David Forsdick is our King's Counsel. Okay. And then the rest of the Council's team are behind, and during the hearing sessions we will be swapping in and out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll be introduced to other members of the Council's team when we come to each respective session. That's fine. Thank you for that. If I can now hear who'll be assisting us this morning from the other northern West Sussex authorities. So get my facts correct.
Hello, good morning. My name is Matt Bates. I'm the Planning Policy Team Leader for Horsham District Council. I'm here with some colleagues. We have my manager, Catherine Howe, who's the Strategic Planning Head, and we also have Tal Kleiman, who's a Senior Planner in our team. We have other colleagues in the public gallery. Thank you.
Hello, Eleanor Harmon, Principal Planning Officer at West Sussex County Council, and I'm here with my colleague Caroline West, who's my Team Manager at West Sussex. Thank you.
Morning, sir. Andrew Marsh, Mid Sussex District Council, Head of Planning Policy and Housing Enabling, and I'm joined by my Assistant Director, Sally Blomfield.
Thank you. And if I can then start on my left with, is it Mr. Wood from Homes England, and we'll go along.
Yeah, morning, sir. Michael Wood, WSP on behalf of Homes England, who are promoting the West of Ifield site.
Good morning, sir. Mark Barrett from the Home Builders Federation.
Morning, Judith Ashton, representing Waits Developments with interests at Cravitt Park.
Good morning. Good morning. David Murray Cox from Turley on behalf of A2 Dominion.
Good morning, Nigel DeWitt, National Highways.
Thank you. Mr. North.
Good morning, sir. Mr. North, representing Holiday Extras, Tim North and Associates. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Suzanne Holloway from Vale Williams on behalf of Ardmore Limited.
I note the crossed fingers, so thank you. Good morning, Graham Keane, King's Council's instructed by Vale Williams on behalf of Ardmore, and it looks like the mic's working fine so far. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Richard Agnew from Gladman Developments.
Thank you for that. So if I can ask people to turn to the agenda for this morning's session, we're going to start with the first item, as I say, on duty to cooperate. I mean, just set some brief context to this. Obviously, the duty still applies. It applied at the point of submission of this plan. As I'm sure the Council and others will be aware, it is something that cannot be retrospectively remedied once the plan is in examination. In terms of the strategic matters that I think we're particularly focused on in terms of the duty to cooperate, can be summarised as followed and are structured as such in terms of the agenda. is firstly, I think the Council referred to this in their opening statement, is obviously the appreciable unmet housing need and the efforts to secure potential assistance to meet this need in a way which could produce a sustainable pattern of development. And we're interested in whether previous approaches during the last round of plan making in North and West Suffolk have a reasonable prospect of delivery again. And then the second strand under the duty to cooperate we wish to kind of particularly look at this morning are the implications around potential wider growth. We've kind of used the phrase at Crawley. It's a phrase I think we've seen in the evidence and within the plan itself in terms of what's potentially being considered in terms of neighbouring authorities. And I think we want to look at it in two ways. Firstly, does this plan as submitted inhibit or potentially frustrate wider growth options, or is it positive in terms of its outlook in that regard? And then secondly, given, I think again it's been referred to in the opening statement, Crawley's geographical constraints, whether there's an understanding or mechanisms whereby were growth to take place at Crawley, it could deliver benefits or opportunities for some of the borough's requirements and potential mechanisms that could enable that to take place. We've specifically asked or requested the attendance of Horsham, Mid Sussex and West Sussex County Council as signatories to the North and West Sussex Statement of Common Ground on the housing market area. I think we note none of the authorities are asserting or submitting that Crawley has failed the duty to cooperate, and there may be matters that are more matters of planned soundness rather than the duty itself. I think we'd like to emphasise we're obviously not here today, this morning, examining the Horsham plan or the Mid Sussex plan. And we're obviously not going to make recommendations that have particular soundness or legality bearings for those emerging plans. But I think given some of the issues that have been raised and our need to look very carefully at the issue of Crawley's unmet housing need, I think it'd be helpful to hear from the adjoining North and West Sussex authorities in terms of the general approach that is being taken. So I think I'd just like to have set that out as an initial position from ourselves as inspectors. And so firstly I'd like to turn, I think, to Crawley Borough Council. It's in essence a reflection of our matter and issues question 1.6, and in terms of the approach that's been taken to Crawley's, having identified that there are unmet housing needs, the efforts that the Borough Council has gone to engage with others to meet those, to see how those unmet needs could be met, and the approach that's been taken in terms of the various statements of common ground that have been secured and provided on plan submission. So I don't know if that first question, MIQ, it's MIQ 1.6, is for, would it be Ms Brigden to assist us on this point?
Yeah, thank you very much, Inspector. So Crawley Borough Council believes it has clearly demonstrated effective and ongoing joint working, and it is set out in full detail in the Council's published Duty to Cooperate statement dated July 2023, which is the submission document reference number KD DTC 01 and its appendices, which is 01B, and the post-submission document, which is 01C. That post-submission document effectively replaced Appendix K from the original 01 document with some additional information. It's also further explained in the Council's written statement for Matter 1, Issue 2, then that's examination document CBC MIQ 001, particularly pages 11-17. The duty to cooperate statement has been shared and it's been agreed with the other prescribed bodies at a number of stages through the local plans preparation, and that's set out paragraphs 2.38 to 2.39 of the Duty to Cooperate statement. The Crawley Submission Local Plan, which is the May 2023 document, CBLP 01, acknowledges the importance of effective cooperation with our neighbouring authorities for Crawley, as paragraph 1.32 on page 15. And it sets out the strategic issues relating to the future development of Crawley over the plan period, and that's paragraph 1.30 of page 14 of the local plan. The Council has agreed a series of statements of common ground with prescribed bodies, and in particular the neighbouring and other nearby local authorities. And those document references are DS S0 SO CG 01 to number 16. And they've been prepared throughout the whole process of the local plan review. So they do follow previous versions, and they will continue to be updated, but at this current point they show a moment in time, but they really should be considered in the context of the ongoing joint working and cooperation, which pretty much covers every level of all the councils, officer and member levels, and a variety of different engagement mechanisms, from informal meetings, formal consultations, shared information, joint evidence commissioning, and that's not just for the Crawley Borough Local Plan, that's also for the neighbouring authorities' plan making and decision taking. One point I probably would like to sort of emphasise, which is a little bit stating the obvious. Crawley is tightly constrained. It's a very small urban administrative area with high levels of growth. And it actually wouldn't be possible for us to consider planning for the borough without effective and ongoing cooperation with our neighbours. That sets the scene a little bit. That said, it isn't a duty to agree, but the approach between the authorities in this particular area, so the North and West Sussex housing market area particularly, but also the Greater Brighton and West Sussex area, the Gatwick Diamonds authorities, the North West Sussex Water Resource Zone, the Ashdown Forest authorities, and the Gatwick authorities, just for example, have a strong history of working together to consider and resolve strategic issues as far as possible through the plan-led system. And whilst I can admit, and it is quite plain to see, that it hasn't currently resulted in Crawley's unmet housing needs being met, it isn't due to a failure of the councils to positively seek to meet the housing needs of the housing market area in full. It reflects a significant impact of a unique and unexpected water neutrality issue, which has prevented substantial levels of anticipated development from taking place until a solution was found. And it reflects other environmental infrastructure constraints which will need to be considered through the other neighbouring authorities' local plan examinations and are outside the scope of this local plan. So whilst that is not something that our local plan can nail down, it is seeking through the plan to positively acknowledge its role as a statutory consultee on these matters, particularly but not restricted to when development is proposed close to or adjacent to Crawley's administrative boundaries, and i.e. at Crawley. Happy to respond to any other specific question.
Okay, thank you. I mean, is the phrase at Crawley an acceptable or kind of recognised kind of term to kind of to reference the kind of the wider?
It reflects back to a study that was undertaken sort of 2008, 2009, which was called the At Crawley study. And essentially it had put a big ring around Crawley and looked at a number of opportunities that has resulted in Forge Wood coming forward, and which is the new neighbourhood within Crawley's boundaries. And it also has resulted in Kilmwood Vale coming forward, which is in Horsham's district, but is immediately adjacent to the Bewbush neighbourhood in Crawley.
Thank you. And I wonder if the council, the borough, again, back to Crawley Borough Council to assist on this point. We're sort of starting to go into MIQ 1.7, but there's probably an element of overlap. There's obviously a statement of common ground with the northwestern Sussex Housing Market Authority area authorities. Within it has I sort of describe it as a kind of a sequential approach in terms of unmet needs. So the priority is firstly any unmet need that arises within the housing market area, and then to look to secondly to any unmet need arising loose terminology, but the coastal authorities. Was that something that existed at the time of the last local plan you're able to assist on? Is that something that's purposefully evolved or developed during the preparation of Crawley's local plan?
Yeah, it sort of it evolved from both, actually. So it wasn't around particularly at the time of the previous set of local plans, although that was the way that we've worked. There is a very strong evidence going back, quite a long way and been revisited in relation to the housing market area, and that was picked up again in our 2019 strategic housing market area assessment. But in terms of the outcomes of the previous set of examinations for the three authorities within the North and West Sussex area, highlighted the importance of meeting the needs of the housing market area, particularly I think the examinations for Mid Sussex and Horsham plans determined that Crawley's unmet needs was unable to go anywhere else. So within the housing market area was the priority, and that is something that we've since taken forward for this plan.
Thank you. And before I sort of stray too much into our MIQ 1.7, just on MIQ 1.6, as I say, we've got no submissions from prescribed duty to cooperate bodies asserting that the duty to cooperate has not been met in this case, but I am mindful others have expressed reservations in terms of the evidence that's before us and particularly the statements of common ground that have been provided. So with that in mind, with the MIQ 1.6, I will afford an opportunity if there's anybody who wishes to further expand on that point, or wishes anything further they wish to say in terms of I'll describe it as the quality of and content of the statements of common ground. Mr. Beraint, please, for the HBF.
Thank you, sir. It's really a wider point with regards to some of the duty to cooperate work that's gone on, and I think there's recognised that within the North West Sussex or West North Sussex. I'm getting confused myself now. So, with regards to there seems to have been that more active engagement. I think my concern is in terms of how active that engagement has been in terms of other neighbouring authorities. And I think moving away from the council looked at the HMA. And I think that's reasonable, but actually it hasn't gone any wider in terms of those discussions and the detail of the discussions with those other neighbouring authorities. And this really comes back to paragraph 60 of the MPPF, which does talk about neighbouring areas. It doesn't necessarily reflect purely on housing market areas in terms of actually how that engagement has taken forward and how positive and that approach has been, rather than just has it been letters and responses, rather than actually that officer and political engagement really with the process, not just in North West Sussex, but also those other neighbouring authorities where needs could be met. So I think that's the concern I would have in terms of the evidence and whether the evidence suggests that's taken place. It feels more like a series of written correspondence saying, oh no, we can't meet your need, and no, we can't help. And I think that's the difficulty I have, sir, with some of the evidence. Actually, how proactive and positive has it been in terms of that ongoing engagement? Thank you.
Thank you for that. If I give the council an opportunity to respond to that in terms of, I think the point from the HBF is, casting the net wider than the adjoining housing market authority areas. My geography tells me going north of here, we're into Surrey, Greenbelt, South, the coastal authorities, but in terms of the exercise of engaging with those other authorities.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are quite right. It isn't just constrained to the housing market area. The approach the council has taken is wider. We have groupings with the West Sussex and Greater Brighton authorities, and we also meet regularly with the Gatwick Diamond authorities, which are the four authorities in Surrey to the north of us. Includes Epsom and Newell, as well as the three that immediately adjoin Crawley, those discussions are positive and ongoing. We are very aware of the current status of the Surrey plans and also their greenbelt constraints. We wrote to a very, very wide range of authorities, so going even beyond the West Sussex, Greater Brighton and Gatwick Diamond authorities, both to the east and west, both in December in 2020 and in 2023. We obviously received no positive response in terms of taking any housing need from Crawley. It's a very constrained area, authorities with lots of their own issues to deal with and their own development needs within their own housing market areas. From a Crawley point of view, a lot of responses were that the housing market area should be looking first at meeting its needs, and Crawley's unmet needs should be being met in Mid-Sussex and Horsham, potentially a small amount accepted in the Hawley area of Reigate and Banstead, which makes up the North and West Sussex housing market area. And I think that it's that approach that is important for the Crawley Borough local plan in determining how much of its housing and other development needs it can meet within its borough, and how much is unmet and should be being considered as close to the borough as is reasonably appropriate for the meeting the housing needs of the area.
Thank you. And certainly looking at the various statements of common ground, and I think Turley's for A2 Dominion, your statement I think shows or summarises from Arran to Wealden, authorities are not exactly stepping forward to assist Crawley.
Yes, yes, thank you. Sorry, I've got a bit of a froggy throat. Our statement for this morning's session actually paints a picture that things have gone backwards, if not rather than forwards. I think if you were to look back at the statements of common ground which accompanied earlier stages of this plan's preparation, then the picture might perhaps be a little rosier. The position around the north of Crawley is absolutely clear. You've got greenbelt issues, you've got Gatwick Airport for one, and the situation with the Tandridge local plan is extremely well publicised. To the south, that leaves you with Mid-Sussex and Horsham. Well, the Mid-Sussex plan has been published. We've seen what that says. And our position is that just about gets over their own needs. Horsham, we wait with bated breath to see what that will say. But the latest evidence that you have is that that's actually gone backwards in recent months.
Thank you. I mean, picking up that kind of strand, and I think we are getting sort of more firmly into MIQ 1.7 territories. The council, as you say, Ms. Brigden, for the council, there seems to be a lot of forums for kind of cooperation at officer and other levels, various kind of meetings. But one of the intended outcomes of the duty to cooperate process is a kind of an effectiveness, and that will then lead to something. And in the case of Crawley, logic says it must have been fairly clear in the early stages of plan preparation there would be an element of unmet, certainly unmet housing need. That whether that cooperation has kind of led to effective outcomes, and whether the position we find ourselves in now, which I read as the Northern West Sussex authorities recognise as an unmet need, will seek to do what they can to meet, where they can to meet that unmet need, but at this moment in time, they're not committing to meeting any of that unmet need that's arising from Crawley, and that's essentially as far as I think the process has got us. And I wonder whether there's been kind of any further dialogue, engagement, or more widely consideration of whether there are other approaches we raised in our MIQs about whether a joint plan would have been an appropriate or effective approach in this part of the world, given Crawley's situation. So I don't know if you want, it would be Ms Brigden to respond to those points and the point raised by, is it Mr Murray? Is it Mr Murray Cox? So I can't see your nameplate from Turley's. Murray Cox, yep. Okay, thank you.
Yes. I think so. In terms of the joint plan, the council did start off. The previous plans were almost exactly the same situation as this current at this same stage and point in time. So Crawley Borough local plan was being considered at a similar time when Horsham's plan was being considered and the Mid Sussex one was being developed. So this isn't unusual from a Crawley point of view. We establish the unmet needs. That, whilst yes, absolutely, I think everyone has been very familiar with Crawley's unmet needs for a long time. The actual number isn't possible to nail down until the point of submission when you have set your housing figure. So it has been a moving beast, and obviously we have kept our neighbouring authorities and wider authorities up to date as part of that. We considered the joint plan. It didn't work for the three authorities for a number of reasons, but it wasn't discounted. It is set out in our local development scheme that was an approach that we did consider jointly. But we were all at slightly different times, and particularly at the point that Crawley started to look at reviewing its plan, the Mid-Sussex district plan had only just been adopted that year. So it wasn't something that was particularly practical to take forward as a Northern West Sussex area. What we have done is worked extremely closely, particularly, as I say, in relation to developments that are being promoted and proposed on the Crawley boundaries. So we haven't just taken, here's our number, what are you going to do about it approach. We have worked very closely and very positively with our neighbouring authorities. I think it has to be seen in the context of water neutrality. We can't get away from the fact that is the reason, the critical reason that one, our plan is delayed, but also there is substantial issues and difficulties within the water resource zone to make up the needs. And absolutely, I think that the changes in terms of the way that the statements of common ground are written reflect that. Certainly at the point that the council was prior to water neutrality, the indications very much from particularly Horsham district were a lot more favourable in terms of their capacity within their area. Now, the capacity within Horsham district isn't for this local plan, and obviously the council will be making its own consideration representations to the Horsham plan in due course. But I think what we can say is that the authorities haven't just sat and relaxed and just let this happen. That we've worked extremely hard jointly to deliver a solution to the water neutrality issue as quickly as we possibly can. And that has been effective joint working. And whilst it might not result in figures adding up at this exact point, it does mean that we have got plans which are progressing and development which is potentially possible to come forward. And that really does show how positive and how effective and an actual outcome of our joint working as authorities.
Thank you. And a note from the Council's various duties to cooperate submissions and when its topic paper on the kind of the unmet needs that I think last time round, I mean, ultimately through the respective plan making processes, there was only ultimately a very small shortfall against the overall housing need. Whether there's an anticipation or hope that history will repeat itself. But I don't know if the Borough Council and then perhaps bring in other authorities on this point. I mean, the combination of it seems to me the housing market area, looking at the figures in terms of what's changed from objectively assessed need to local housing need under the standard method, I think there's around, by my broad calculation, seems to be around about a 25% increase. So you're ultimately looking to deliver just shy of 2,800 dwellings per annum across the housing market area, and you've referred to also the water neutrality issue as well. Although obviously we've got representations before us that say, well, that will resolve itself in the short term. Others may have a different view on that, but perhaps if I afford the opportunity to Crawley and its colleagues within the northwestern. Northern West Sussex housing market area, whether those provide legitimate reasons to why at this stage, unmet need remains an unresolved issue that's potentially subject to whatever happens to the duty to cooperate, a matter that then further flows to other plan examinations. But I'll afford that first opportunity to say whether there are particular circumstances before us here that mean unmet need remains an unresolved or is justifiably an unresolved issue.
Yeah, just very, very briefly on the matter of the water neutrality. I don't think the matter of the water neutrality will resolve itself anytime soon without an awful lot of effort and work that the councils have put in, and so that absolutely it won't resolve itself essentially, but when it is resolved, and it is being resolved, it is a slow process. It is a build-up of the bank, and when we get to the water neutrality session, we can I'm sure explain that in more detail. But absolutely, from a Crawley point of view, the plan that's in front of you today is the same delivery that we would be anticipating as prior to water neutrality. We are expecting, we haven't pushed any development outside the plan period. Yes, there's been a slight slowdown. Crawley's been quite lucky in actually our delivery figures. A lot of the sites, particularly say Forge Wood, are outside of the water neutrality zone, so they have been able to come forward. So from a Crawley point of view, our figure hasn't changed. We haven't restricted it. We haven't tried to suggest that delivery won't come forward. It is a slightly different picture, I think, for our neighbouring authorities, and obviously I'll bring Matt in, I think, to speak in more detail about the Horsham position. But certainly from the Crawley point of view, yes, we would be anticipating the housing delivery levels to come forward within the borough. Yeah.
Thank you. So if I could then perhaps bring in, was it Mr. Bates for Horsham?
Yes, it's Matt Bates, Horsham District Council. I'd just like to firstly say that we fully support what Ms Brigden has recounted to you. We're very much, and as you've just heard, we do work very closely together as authorities and together with Mid Sussex as well within the housing market area. And water neutrality has been incredibly challenging for all of us. It's probably, we thought it might be helpful to outline where we are with our local plan timetable, first of all. We are actually taking our Regulation 19 plan to full council on the 11th of December this year, so just in a couple of weeks' time. And then we will be publishing our Regulation 19 towards the end of January, the 19th of January, I think is the correct date, for a 6-week period of representations, and then looking to submit in June of 2024. On the point about the timing of local plan preparation, actually, and you'll hear from Mid Sussex in a moment, but we're all on a very similar timeline, so it's actually quite fortuitous really, and that we've been able to work together, as Ms Brigden said, in terms of being open about the numbers that we're looking at potentially accommodating. We did write to Crawley Borough. I think I was just looking for the letter to find the date, but I think it was early this year certainly, to confirm that whilst we didn't have a number as yet, because we were still preparing our Regulation 19 plan, but we were pretty sure that we wouldn't be able to meet even our own full need, and therefore were unlikely to be able to assist with meeting Crawley's unmet need. So that, I think, is on public record. That letter in the examination library somewhere, I suspect. Yeah, it's in the duty to cooperate statement. I think it's an appendix. Yeah. So yeah, just to confirm really that, I mean, Ms Brigden kind of set it out very clearly, I think, but Horsham District is probably, I dare say, the worst affected authority in terms of the impact it's had on our local plan, and indeed our current supply of planning permissions within the water resources zone. All of our districts falls within that zone, so water neutrality is in place for the whole of Horsham District. This has had a severe knock-on impact on our housing supply for the last 2 years or so. Our numbers plummeted because we simply weren't able to legally permit developments in our area. That in turn has had a significant impact on our forward housing trajectory that we're looking at in terms of the new Regulation 19 plan, because obviously we've lost a lot of our supply from the early years of that plan period. So that's kind of one of the key reasons why we're not looking so great in terms of our supply going forward. But obviously we very much are working positively to address water neutrality. There is I'm not sure if Ms Brigden mentioned, but there's a statement of common ground specifically on the water neutrality, which involves other parties such as Natural England, Environment Agency, etc. So we're all agreed that we're taking very positive steps to try and accelerate resolving this issue so that we can get the supply back on track again. There's sorry, my computer's gone to sleep. I think I had a note from my colleagues. Did you want to just come in? That's probably easiest, isn't it, Catherine? Yeah, if I could pass over to my colleague, Catherine. Thanks.
Yes, I think the only thing I was really going to add to that, sir, was really just to point out that actually, although we have issues at the moment as a consequence of water neutrality, there was a document in terms of we've been preparing the local plan for a number of years, and actually in July 2021 we took a Regulation 19 to Cabinet. It didn't actually get to Council. Within that plan we were actually talking about meeting about half of Crawley's unmet needs, so it really has been the impact of water neutrality that's had a very significant impact. And just as a sort of to add to that really, since the water neutrality position statement, we've permitted 602 homes, whereas we were delivering about 1,200 homes a year in the period prior to that in terms of our delivery rate. So that just gives you an indication of the impact that it has had.
Thank you. Just sorry, again, I'll sort of just caveat this whole session. Obviously, we're not examining the Horsham approach or their plan, but just in terms of timing and where you are in terms of a Regulation 19 proposed submission plan, has any thought been given to kind of potentially the timing around that in the context of water neutrality being sort of further resolved, that would then potentially enable a kind of submit a sort of a potentially a more positive plan in respect of potential accommodating housing need?
I think what we're very conscious of, sir, is the longer that we don't have a local plan, the greater the risk of unplanned development coming forward, and certainly our administration, our political administration, is very, very concerned about this, as we are indeed as officers. So I think there is a compelling case for our local plan to come forward now as quickly as possible, because essentially that there are ways that some speculative developments can propose their own water neutrality solutions, and thereby, if you like, bypass the kind of planned element of local plans incorporating the strategic water neutrality solution, which then means that we're potentially seeing what we consider to be unsuitable sites, some of them quite significant in size, potentially coming forward, if you like, through the back door, or planning by appeal situations. So that's the reason that we bring this forward now. We think we do have a very strong evidence base that we are able to take things forward with a strategic solution coming online in the fairly near future to water neutrality, and we have a project manager who you will meet and speak to, I think, on Thursday's session, who will be able to tell you all about the detail of that. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you. And I think is it Mr. Marsh for Mid Sussex, please.
Yes, thank you. Just to confirm, really reaffirm what Ms Brigden and Mr Bates have said really about the ongoing engagement between the Bury, North and West Sussex authorities. It's a relationship, I think, that from my memory goes back probably 12, 13 years in terms of the same officer team, in fact, working on our Bury respective plans and the adopted plans, which, as you say, led to the housing market area meeting its housing need in full, minus a very small shortfall, which has now been made up, which was made up through windfall. I think it's fair to say, again, through the statements of common ground, that's an approach, the same approach has been taken through this set of plans. But obviously the context has changed in terms of the standard method. For Mid Sussex itself, our housing need has increased by 200 dwellings per annum compared to the adopted plan. And in the context of 50% AONB, Ashdown Forest, SPA, SAC on our border, which is affected by air quality and recreational disturbance, National Park to the south, and then obviously the Greenbelt authorities to the north, meeting for Mid Sussex to meet its need in the context of an increase of 200 dwellings per annum is still a challenge. However, not quite the position that Mr Murray Cox has sort of put forward in terms of our progress. Our Regulation 18 plan went out to consultation about this time last year. That showed that Mid Sussex can meet its housing need with an oversupply of 302 dwellings, and that's based on a supply-led approach, looking at all of our sites and determining which ones were suitable, developable. We are sort of hot off the press, really. We are due to go to our scrutiny committee with a Regulation 19 plan tomorrow. So although I caveat what I'm about to say with it hasn't been through the scrutiny committee or council, which is scheduled for December this year, that oversupply has increased from 302 to 996. And we make it very clear in the report that any oversupply above meeting our need, of which we can't determine yet because we haven't had the plan examined, would be a contribution towards the North and West Sussex housing market area. So that position has become more positive since Regulation 18, and I think demonstrates the intent of the council and the ongoing engagement that we've had with our neighbouring authorities, that we completely understand the position in terms of unmet need. We've got our policies, we've had our mechanisms in place for a long time in order to go as far as we can to meet that. But obviously, with all of the constraints in mind across the Bury authorities, there does come a point where the total need is too great for us to resolve between us. And I think that's probably where we are now.
Thank you for that. One of our mass issues and questions, it's question 1.9. I think we were thinking very much in terms of, was there an alternative approach of a joint plan? If there wasn't an alternative approach of a joint plan, then was a sort of second level, kind of greater sort of plan, synchronisation and alignment. I think we were thinking particularly around issues around sort of potential infrastructure impacts, so that people like National Highways and others could understand how all these things are potentially going to kind of fit together. I think reading perhaps other submissions, I'm now wondering whether it's the other way around, whether there are particular merits or benefits of Crawley being examined first, so that level of unmet need is kind of determined and assessed, given that it is a supply-led figure, and then that provides certainty to other authorities come their sort of final stages of plan preparation and plan examination. I don't know if I put it to Crawley first, whether there were, it's probably just slightly different from the issue of joint plan, this issue about sort of whether plan making could be synchronised in a way, whether there are advantages to that or issues or risks.
Yeah, I think certainly what we found with the previous set of plans was that it is more helpful to have the Crawley plan figure identified first in the circumstances of 3 separate plans coming forward. That said, the timing of the plans do seem to align. They kind of pick up and drop off and actually for one reason or another seem to be at quite a healthy sort of timing position, I think from this perspective. But certainly without a certain figure, even when we were asking sort of generally about whether anyone was able to meet our housing needs, the question always has come back to the council, but how much? What do what is your figure? What can you meet? And also quite legitimately, are you truly meeting all of the needs that you possibly can within the borough, as that is, the most sustainable location for Crawley's needs to be met. So I think I do take sort of some interest in whether or not an alignment and synchronising the plans sort of artificially would be a good approach. But I think that first and foremost for Crawley, it's important that we have an up-to-date adopted local plan, not just because of housing numbers, but actually for our effective decision making within our borough. So to constrain our timetable to fit neighbouring authorities wouldn't be particularly positive or helpful for us in that respect. But actually, equally, I think on that wider basis of actually having Crawley's unmet needs, or Crawley's needs, the understanding of how much Crawley is able to plan for within its boundaries, first set, then understanding, therefore, what needs to be met elsewhere. And that's not just development needs, that's also in terms of infrastructure as well. And I think there is a helpful benefit of working together, and we do work very closely, I say, with the County Council in terms of those infrastructure impacts and how else they can be managed elsewhere.
Thank you. And on that final point, that's reflected in statements of common ground with West Sussex County Council and others. Yep.
And also in the overarching North and West Sussex statement of common ground as well. There's two. That the overarching one includes the County Council.
Thank you. And in terms of the plan itself, it has at policy H1 at the very end of the policy. The council will work closely with neighbouring authorities, particularly within the North and West Sussex housing market area. I understand that was added, I think, as part of the last round of plan examination process. In terms of the evidence we've got before us, I mean, it seems relatively uncertain as to the extent to which the adjoining housing market authority areas can assist Crawley. I think I put the council's position as saying, well, this happened, this arose last time, and through subsequent plan making, it by and large resolved itself. In terms of that process, I mean, did Crawley have to go to neighbouring plan examinations on the duty to cooperate issue?
We went to the neighbouring authority plan examinations. We didn't have objections on the duty to cooperate because we do work positively together. However, we did have detailed representations that were made at those examinations, and we did sit at the table and seek to assist the inspectors in determining what the final delivery figure for the neighbouring authorities could possibly be. Just in terms of that final part of the policy, yes, it was suggested by our previous local plan inspector as a modification, and that's actually in his report on paragraph 34. And just on it, I would say I certainly contend that paragraph has been helpful, and it will continue to be helpful in terms of strategic planning for the borough, meeting needs beyond its boundaries, and particularly with the uncertainty of the future of duty to cooperate and what it will take its place. It is considered it would be helpful to retain it. But I would like to also stress that even without that paragraph, it'd be hard to envisage a scenario where it would be in Crawley's best interests to not work positively with its neighbouring authorities to seek to meet development needs whilst protecting the wider housing market areas, assets, and ensuring infrastructure delivery. So yeah, just as I think, it's not a reflection of the failure of positive and effective joint working.
No, thank you for that. I mean, these conversations always around duty to cooperate feel kind of slightly abstract, but ultimately we are talking about households who need somewhere to live, the economy that needs people to be here to support it. So there is a real sort of consequences to this, but as you say, Ms. Brigden, ultimately it's not a duty to agree. It's about whether there's been the cooperation. And sort of final question before I take a mid-morning adjournment on that kind of cooperation. And one of the points that's been raised, there's been sort of, as far as I understand it, there's been sort of two formal writings out to kind of authorities more widely in January 2020 and again in April 23. The one in April 23 seems to have quite a short turnaround or deadline for people to respond. Is that something we need to be concerned about?
We had, obviously it's in the context of discussions that we had ongoing. We were very conscious that it was a short turnaround. We accepted obviously that it could bleed into the Reg 19 responses, and actually that, in terms of the ongoing discussion right up to submission. So I think all it was, the short turnaround was essentially for them to fact check the duty to cooperate statement and make sure there was nothing fundamentally incorrect in that, and also to put the feeler out about whether anyone felt that anything in any already agreed statement of common ground needed to be updated, whether there was any sort of anyone coming forward really positively to suddenly say, oh look here, we've got lots of space for you to put your houses, but that's kind of where that was. But it wasn't as sort of short as it appeared.
Yep.
And just on that, just to make it absolutely clear, the ongoing discussion is with all authorities, and it has been ongoing throughout. So yes, whilst we focus very, very neatly on the North and West Sussex authorities, we are in, and we have got statements of common ground with those authorities that are wider, particularly, as I say, in the Gatwick Diamond, Surrey authorities, and also along the coast.
Thank you. Mr. Berrine, please.
Thank you, sir. In terms of just, I suppose, an earlier point in terms of Crawley going first and addressing that unmet need, I think that is helpful in terms of having been involved in the Oxfordshire local plans and going forward, and not having an Oxford plan with that unmet need was very difficult then coming backwards and forwards. So I think that is a welcome that there is that progression through the from Crawley through other areas. I think in terms of that last paragraph H1, it is one that again it's words in a policy. You know, it's the actions that are important. But I think that paragraph is important. But I think it is also the strength of that in terms of the challenge that I think that's needed. I think too often in terms of local plans and duty to cooperate, there is a lot of agreement, that we can't meet need, but then it's not actually followed through in terms of that challenge. And I think that's the important thing, is to say, actually, if it can't be done, it's not just about then leaving that, because it isn't going to be met anywhere else, as we've heard, if it's Greenbelt or if it's National Park and Coastal Authorities. So actually it is, how much is that council going to challenge? And actually wording can help in terms of actually how the local authority reacts, in terms of saying, actually we're going to challenge those authorities to try and do this, rather than actually just, I'll work with them and then acquiesce if they can't meet those needs. So I think it's, again, it is just words in a policy, but I think it's important to recognise that it's a proactive seeking to address this problem, rather than just an acquiescence of whether that can or cannot be met. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm just looking around, and I'm not sure if there is a clock in this room. Okay. They are modern buildings, and technology assumes we've got other means of telling the time. According to the power of Microsoft, it's just gone 11:15. I'm going to suggest a 15-minute break, so I'd like to be back here, please, in this room at 11:30. We've got a couple more questions on duty to cooperate, and then we're going to move on to sustainability appraisal. So I'll adjourn now. Please resume at 11:30 back in this room. Thank you. Okay, it's just gone 11:30, so I am going to resume this hearing session, please. We're still on agenda item 3 and the duty to cooperate. I'm going to move away from the issue of unmet housing needs, unless there's any final sort of burning points that people wish to make that aren't already in their statements that are before us. No. In which case, Mr. Is it DeWitt from National Highways?
Yes, it is. Yes, thank you, sir. Well, it's just the way you pitched that about unmet housing need, and whilst our response is to question 1.11, it does sort of relate to that, and just want to take the opportunity to say that Crawley did engage with National Highways constructively, actively, on an ongoing basis in plan preparation and evidence gathering in the transport study, and the statement of common ground reflects that progress. And also, since the Reg 19 plan's been prepared, they've done sensitivity testing on the transport modelling. So I just wanted to make that point first of all. But in terms of unmet housing need, it's the question which is difficult to answer at this point. But certainly from our perspective as stewards of the strategic road network is the level of unmet needs identified in the Reg 19 plan, and I appreciate there's a degree of addressing that to a point in the wider housing market area, but from our perspective, that level of unmet need, we're not sure, because of the plan making of neighbouring authorities, and they're at they're not as advanced stage, there's uncertainty there, but that uncertainty means we're unsure of what those consequences could be for the strategic road network, and whether those impacts of that unmet need being addressed to an extent. I think it was Mid Sussex sounded like their plans to be quite positive in respect of addressing the housing need, but it's just that uncertainty at this point in time, as identified in the submitted plan, of the unmet need and what that might mean for infrastructure such as the strategic road network, and we have the unknown therefore of what those impacts may be in terms of the SRN, and whether those impacts can be adequately mitigated. So it's a level of uncertainty. I think the point you were making just before the break will help in a way of addressing that by Crawley local plan coming first, and then if that can get over the line, there'd be you'd have that certainty there of an adopted upstate development plan, and then we can understand at that point in time what the consequences are for that unmet need and how we respond. But it is probably going to be quite challenging from our perspective in terms of responding to the imminent sort of consultations from the neighbouring authorities, because it's very difficult in terms of trying to understand as how far they can go. They have my sympathies, because when you do your transport modelling, you can factor in your commitments, your certainties and your allocations, whereas if your neighbouring authorities at the same stage, how do you treat those? So I think fundamentally it was that point about what unmet need means in terms of the SRN and the consequences for that in terms of mitigation, and whether adequate mitigation can be identified further down the line if it's not addressed through plan making.
Thank you. And one would assume there are sort of parallel issues for people like the water utility companies in terms of wastewater, in terms of the treatment works in Crawley, and how that will meet needs arising from this plan and from other plans. I mean, the way I've read the evidence and understand the Borough Council's position, and they can correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that these subsequent matters will be for the following local plans in terms of dealing with the transport, the impacts of those respective plans on the transport network, including any that arise if they are in a position to accommodate unmet need. But I do have some sympathy with you, Mr. DeWitt, in terms of for strategic infrastructure that crosses boundaries. obviously we're going to come on to transport and infrastructure at separate sessions, but I know the Borough Council, is there anything it wishes to say on that, and whether the extent to which it's tried to kind of mitigate or look at these kind of strategic cross-boundary infrastructure issues?
Yeah, absolutely. It is part of the discussions that we have. We meet very regularly with regards to the North and West Sussex authorities, and that includes West Sussex County Council, both on the sides of the sort of the planning policy and other aspects of the council, as well as the Highways Authority. The three authorities are all supported by the County Council's Highways team, and when we get to the Highways session, they will be able to probably articulate it with a lot more skill than I can. We did, at the start of the local plan, when we were looking at the evidence, we were very conscious that we wanted to understand that whatever we were suggesting in terms of mitigations and the impacts of the Crawley Borough local plan, how that would play out with potential development. We can't plan for outside the boundary. We can't determine where other authorities are going to be putting development. At that time, Homes England were suggesting there could be potential for 10,000 dwellings immediately adjacent to Crawley on the western side. So we felt that it wasn't something we could completely ignore. So we did look at scenario 3 in our transport modelling, which essentially put what we thought might be a reasonable assumption at that time in terms of the unmet needs arising from Crawley, at least on the Horsham side, to see where that would go. So we didn't completely ignore it. It isn't the scenario of the local plan. The transport modelling scenario for the local plan is scenario 2. But we felt it would be helpful for us to understand whether or not in such a scenario where there was strategic development so close to Crawley that actually we weren't doing the wrong thing with the mitigation that we were doing. So that was the justification for looking at that. What I have set out in the response to matter 1, paragraphs 1.11.9 down to 12 was actually what we have done. We have got the proposal for the area of search for the Crawley Western multimodal link, which again that's going to be considered another session, and we have had those discussions in terms of all the different types of infrastructure. And just finally, our neighbouring authorities have also had that same approach in terms of the way that they're being advised by the County Council. Ourselves and Horsham use the same consultants for the transport modelling, which has helped. For the Mid-Sussex side, the County Council have been very aware of where development is coming forward through the Crawley Borough local plan to take that into account as well. So it isn't something that's been ignored, but we've at no point has anyone suggested that our plan prejudices the delivery elsewhere, and we believe that our plan is resilient to such development should it come forward.
Thank you for that. So that probably neatly leads to the final couple of questions or areas in terms of our consideration of duty to cooperate this morning, in terms of, if I can describe it, as kind of looking out from Crawley as to what may be happening in the vicinity of the borough. And as I say, this is without prejudice to whatever is going to come forward in respect of neighbouring plans, but there are clearly, it seems to us, issues for Crawley in terms of affordable housing need and delivery, and how that particular housing need can be accommodated. Similarly, it seems to us from reading the infrastructure delivery plan, issues around secondary education to meet the needs within the borough. I think it's just understanding through the duty to well, in this instance, through the duty to cooperate process, how that sort of dialogue has gone, and whether there are, as you say, Ms. Brigden, there are, obviously Crawley can't necessarily dictate what happens in neighbouring plans, but are there potential mechanisms or ways in which Crawley could potentially influence matters, say in relation to affordable housing or other infrastructure, were development to come forward within the vicinity of the borough, whether that's through, I know historically you've done a joint area action plan with Horsham for the west of Bewbush area some time ago. I think I've also read reference to planning performance agreements. So I don't know, Ms. Brigden, whether you kind of just outline through the duty to cooperate process how you've kind of looked at some of these sort of adjacent issues.
Yeah, and yeah, starting from the point of the joint area action plan, yes, that was something that was prepared by Crawley and Horsham jointly and jointly adopted, and it was a positive outcome. With the strategic developments coming forward currently, it's felt because the twin tracking and the speed at which the developments are coming forward, that actually a joint area action plan following the adoption of the plans wasn't going to be an appropriate approach. So instead, the intention has been that they come through the district plans in the authorities that they are. That said, yes, Crawley is a joint signatory to the planning agreement with Horsham and Homes England, and it has very strongly been part of those discussions. I have to say the County Council also, as a deliverer of infrastructure, has been engaged and involved in those, and speaking on behalf of the needs of the County Council's functions in the area. So that does take that sort of education side into account. In terms of affordable housing, with the Kilmore Vale site and also with the site to the south of Crawley in mid-Sussex at Pease Pottage, they have come forward with nomination rights agreed between the two councils in terms of providing 50% for each authority's housing register. And that has been a positive approach. That's done slightly outside of the planning process, but it is something that, you know, we have captured through the planning system, in the sense that it is something that we would be requesting at each stage. In terms of the council's responses to both the Horsham Mid-Sussex Regulation 19 plans, these are matters that we raise at those stages as well. So it's both the informal conversations and the meetings that we have. It's at each level with the members and the chief executives, and then it is also the formal planning processes in terms of the plan making and decision taking that we will articulate these needs.
Thank you. So would you say, Ms. Brigden, from Crawley's perspective on things like secondary education, those needs are understood and adjoining authorities through yourselves, possibly by Sussex County Council, are aware that that's an issue for Crawley that potentially could not be accommodated within the borough itself? Yeah.
Yes, yeah, it's been very clear through that process.
Okay, thank you. On this issue of sort of wider or potential wider growth at Crawley and sort of the duty to cooperate process, and bring in, is it Miss Ashton, is it on behalf of Waits?
Thank you, sir. I just really wanted to second what Miss Brigden's just said in terms of the way in which the planning process is working above and beyond statements common ground. I mean, if you look at policy H1 and the last paragraph of that, it actually talks about the way in which things will move forward. Moving forward in terms of the relationship with Mid-Sussex, Crawley Borough Council, Mid Sussex have worked very closely on the strategy for Crabbit Park. I think it would help you enormously, sir, if, with the caveat that Mr Marsh has already given you, the committee report for tomorrow night is actually made available to you, because it has a copy of the track change version of Mid Sussex's Reg 19 plan, and that clearly demonstrates how, with Crabbit Park, the strategy in terms of, in particular, education provision and the strategic highway network is being addressed through that strategic allocation, and Mr Marsh could probably add to that for you. I think also, if you look back at the Statement of Common Ground with Mid Sussex, that also references joint nomination rights on affordable housing provision. I think, you know, overall there is a very clear working relationship that goes beyond just the authorities. It includes the developers involved, it includes the county council, and it does also include National Highways.
Thank you for that. I note there's an invitation there. I know it's not Mid Sussex's plan examination. I'm slightly cautious because I think that you say, Mr Marsh, this is a report to is initially a scrutiny committee, so it's not yet gone near Cabinet or full council. I mean, things could potentially change.
I think the, as Miss Ashton said, it was the Crabbit Park site was in a Regulation 18 version of the plan, which did go through scrutiny and through council last year, and then obviously subject to the necessary consultation. And yes, as Miss Ashton said as well, I can confirm that the changes in the plan that we're proposing to take through those two governance bodies, I suppose, are reflective of the conversations that we've had with Crawley and with the site promoter. Especially looking at the transport, the on-site secondary education in this instance. Had a site visit with the Borough Council and the promoter to look at opportunities and constraints on site, the landscape, topology, all those sorts of things, connectivity between Mid Sussex and Crawley, and that's reflected in the policy. And yeah, just to direct you again back to the Statement of Common Ground between us and Crawley, SOCG 08, where all that's picked up, and that was signed back in July this year, and is then flowing into the changes that are proposed in the policy. So there is an intent, again, with the caveat from earlier, there is the intent there that Crabbit Park will have that connectivity, and therefore the opportunity for the community of Crawley to use some of the facilities on that site, and secondary education being one of them, because we are aware of that secondary education need, which is informed our view about which of our sites should be accommodating such a facility.
Thank you. And then on the other side of the borough, there are obviously various references in front of us to either west of Crawley or west of Ifield. I don't think Mr Wood, on behalf of Homes, I don't think Homes England, from what I've read, is again claiming there's been a duty to cooperate issue, but there may be other issues of plan soundness. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm not contesting this duty to cooperate issue, and within the hearing statement for this matter, there's confirmation re the joint working with both Crawley and Horsham in terms of the pre-application and the PPA that have been involved, and the infrastructure that's being supported within that development, including the secondary school, where there's a contract with the Department for Education for delivery of that secondary school. So with no particular kind of complaints or contestants in terms of this plan in regards to that. There's some comments in terms of some wording tweaks that we'll come on to later as part of the Matter 2 statement that just we'll raise then.
Without putting Homes England too much on the spot, in various documents that I've read, it seems to me that you present west of Crawley or west of Ifield as very much kind of meeting or potentially meeting Crawley unmet needs. Is that the current position, or is that how we should be interpreting Homes England's position?
clearly the geography of the site means that it needs to talk to Crawley, it needs to understand what Crawley's needs are, and how we can support in terms of infrastructure, housing delivery, etc. It ultimately is a site that's within Horsham District Council's boundaries, and it will be tested through that local plan review process that hopefully will be coming up very soon. Thanks.
Thank you for that. I've got no further questions on the duty to cooperate issue. I will give the Borough Council, is there anything further the Borough Council wishes to say on, or it hasn't said already, on the duty to cooperate? You've been pretty thorough in responding to questions, so I'm not anticipating anything, no. Okay. Thank you for that. Obviously it's something that our report will have to address. Sorry, thank you. Is it Mr Agnew for Gladman?
Yes, thank you. It's only a brief point. My flag was waving around all over there. I'll try. It's a difficult point to raise without erring into other matters, I suppose. But in terms of that end of policy H1 paragraph, and it's whether it's quite a non-committal paragraph, and whether there could be a wording change there to actually ensure that the effectiveness of this duty to cooperate process can be, I suppose, taken further than just exploring, because it doesn't commit anyone to anything. Obviously, that is a matter for the local plans that are coming past the local plan examination, the Crawley local plan examination. But it's in terms of assisting Crawley in their position, trying to actually ensure these means are met, whether that actually can be taken further than what it currently says.
Thank you. Is it principally the word kind of exploring? Is that where the kind of the...
I think so, yeah. I've been pondering how to actually form a word in that I think would be sufficient, and I can't put a word on it at this stage, but I could put some further thought to it, to something that I think would be appropriate.
Thank you for that. I'm obviously mindful that this is wording that was put in as part of the last local planning examination, and that obviously the context around national policy has not evolved significantly. I mean, I think what I was trying to get to the council earlier and some of the questioning around kind of how this has worked, and is obviously through subsequent plan making things have kind of ultimately come together to deliver housing needs within the market area, whether this has kind of had the necessary kind of teeth to kind of be effective.
I think, well, from a Crawley Council point of view, I don't necessarily think it goes to the duty to cooperate in terms of the sort of the legal side of it. Possibly a matter of soundness, but the wording, as you said, was suggested by the previous plan inspector and has played out to be effective as the means of working towards certainly the adopted 3 local plans and the subsequent work that we've undertaken, where we have very seriously explored opportunities and resolved infrastructure and environmental constraints in certain areas, and we are working towards that. I haven't seen alternative wording. I contemplated whether there would be anything better. I don't. As far as I can see, that paragraph does and has worked.
Thank you. I mean, do you want to leave the point with us, Mr Agnew, that you've raised?
Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any further points people wish to make in relation to the legal duty to cooperate? No, in which case, can I thank everybody for their contributions on that part of the agenda. We'll now move on to agenda item 4, which is split into kind of various parts. If anybody's wondering whether there are kind of parts of our MIQs that are missing, particularly around plan making and consultation. That's a reflection that we didn't really have any further questions. We were satisfied with the evidence that we've been provided, but we do want to look at, firstly, the issue of sustainability appraisal. I think as parties are aware, this is a requirement around plan making. It embodies also the requirements of strategic environmental assessment. We raised it our matter 1, issue 5. And in terms of the sustainability appraisal that accompanies this plan, like all good appraisals, it's over 400 pages, I think, in this instance. They often are, so yeah, Crawley's not alone. I think it's really picking up both our questions MI 116 and 117 and probably ultimately 119 as to whether the sustainability appraisal that's been undertaken to accompany this plan has kind of looked at all reasonable options. It's been clear about why perhaps unreasonable options have been discounted and how kind of the pool of reasonable alternatives have been considered to then identify the approach that the plan should take, and then that supports that the plan would be an appropriate strategy for the borough. So if I can invite the Borough Council first to kind of think assist on the adequacy of or otherwise of what it's done in terms of sustainability appraisal, please.
Yeah. This is going to be a bit of a joint effort, but I will start. I will kick off. So yes, the council submitted a full sustainability appraisal and strategic environmental assessment that incorporates an equality impact assessment and health impact assessment alongside the submission of the Crawley Borough Local Plan. The SEA, so that's KD/SA01 document, meets the statutory requirements. It's been prepared as an iterative document alongside the preparation of the local plan. It's been subject to formal public consultation and scrutiny from the statutory consultee bodies, and it's been supported at Reg 19 by confirmation from Historic England, Rep 061, and the Environment Agency, Rep 062, and Natural England, Rep 113. That's also set out in the consultation statement, Appendix A, and pages 864 to 865. So yeah, if the essay was a big document. So chapter 2 of the essay explains the methodology that we took for the SEA process, and chapter 7 summarises the findings. But the actual detailed appraisals for the strategy, policies and designations and allocations are provided in appendixes F, G and H. And these show how the council has considered reasonable alternatives in a systematic and comprehensive way. So whilst the local plan wasn't starting from a blank page, the adopted local plan was considered at that time to be continue to be up to date and relevant for planning decisions. The SA and SEA process relooked at everything, at every single one of the policy options completely afresh, and considered whether or not there were other reasonable alternatives which should be assessed. But the assessment wasn't taken in a vacuum, and those alternatives that were considered to be reasonable and realistic by the council on the basis of legislation and evidence were the ones that were considered. So that's the situation that the council has submitted the sustainability appraisal under.
Good morning. Can I just make a couple of points on the legal framework? Obviously, we're in Regulation 12 territory of the 2004 regulations, and the purpose of that regulation is to ensure that the plan's formulated cognizant of the environmental effects, basically, and looking at alternative options to come up with a better plan that doesn't have the same effect or lessens the effect. The key words in Regulation 12.2, of course, are reasonable alternatives taking into account the objectives and geographical scope of the plan. We know the geographical scope, and the fundamental objectives, of course, are to meet the
needs of the council's area. And as everyone knows, fundamental to that is the constraint on land supply, and fundamental to that is the first fundamental question, namely whether to safeguard, and I'm going to use the word from the NPPF, safeguard critical land for the southern runway. That question, whether to safeguard critical land for the southern runway, was, if you like, a sort of entry-level question. It was fundamental to everything that followed. The choice of doing that or not was set out. Whether to do it or not to do it was set out, and we've obviously know what happened with the previous inspector and so on. And once that choice was made, that sets, we say, that sets the parameters for consideration of reasonable alternatives for everything else that follows, just as a matter of basic principle. And so there have been a number of suggestions in terms of reasonable alternatives that come, looking at alternative SCL locations in the safeguarded area to the south. And there's been suggestions about, well, you could look at different approaches to on and off airport car parking and all that sort of stuff. But the parameters for that discussion, and this is the key headline point I'd like to make at the outset, I'll deal with car parking in a bit more detail later on, but that the parameters of reasonable alternatives were largely set by the safeguarding decision. And once one's done that, it really is a matter for the evaluative assessment of the council as to what reasonable alternatives to consider. And you'll be aware, sir, of the Ashdown cases and the Friends of the Earth on the M4 in Newport, that those cases which make it abundantly clear that evaluative assessment is really a matter of for the judgment of the local authority. And it doesn't have to delve down into every sub-alternative. It doesn't have to disaggregate the alternatives and look at every possible permutation. It just needs to look at the alternatives to allow it to work out whether there's a better environmental way of doing a particular thing. And so quite a lot of the submissions we've seen from opposing parties have missed that point. They're basically suggesting that we had to do a HEX or we had to do a particular reasonable alternative, when in fact the case law is very clear that that's a matter for us as to where we draw the line as to what those reasonable alternatives are. And it's interesting to note just from the case law that the only times that this has been found to be failed is where the council has simply turned a blind eye to the obligation at all. And you'll have seen from the sustainability appraisal that's exactly not what's happened here. I did note, so that none of the case law was in the core papers. I wasn't proposing to burden you with it, but the Ashdown case is paragraph 42 of the Ashdown case is the only thing you really need to follow.
Thank you. So just before I bring in others, I'm obviously mindful we're going to look at employment land tomorrow under matter 4, but in terms of this sort of general approach to looking at the kind of the reasonable alternatives from the Borough Council's perspective, I think what you're saying to us is it's justified to kind of have this initial sieve where if a site is critical or falls within the land that's safeguarded kind of critical land, that's an unreasonable option. It's not taken any further. And does the SA, forgive me, in terms of not knowing it intimately back to front, clearly set out that approach and how that kind of initial kind of discounting
yes, it's page the GAT 2, whether to safeguard and how much to safeguard is at page 250 to 251, and there's three options: safeguard the land as shown in the Gatwick Airport Master Plan and therefore obviously not available; delete the safeguarding, and that's option 2; or go for option 3, which is the one that we'll be debating tomorrow. And page 250 and 251.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, I understand that others have made submissions on this point, so I think at this moment I'll bring in, is it Mr. Keane on behalf of, is it Ardmore Limited?
It is, thank you. I could be brief and just make a few points on this, because obviously you've read the written representations around this point, and it's really directed to your MIQ 1.116 in the main. So the key point is that the sustainability appraisal is flawed because it selectively and inconsistently uses safeguarding as a flexible constraint. It proposes removal for the allocation of Gatwick Green in relation to policy EC4 and potentially for some of the route of the Western Multimodal Transport Link, which is ST4, but treats it as safeguarding as an absolute constraint under GAT2. In fact, even increasing the safeguarding area to some extent, which we'll come on to later. And so therefore, there has been a failure to properly assess or justify both the principle of the extent and, the principle and the extent of the safeguarding area. Now, so you'll know, and well, it's a matter for later in the examination, that my client doesn't accept that the proposed safeguarding area is justified in terms of the framework requirement, particularly in relation to robust evidence, to justify its continued, we say, sterilising retention, because that safeguarding has blighted what is, I think, acknowledged widely to be sustainable land in Crawley for some decades now. And the fact that the Borough Council accepts that safeguarding can be treated flexibly in places emphasises, we say, the need for the appraisal to have properly looked at reasonable alternatives, and that options that might have required removal of safeguarding or amendment to it, because my clients, so when the essay considers the Jersey Farm sites taken compendiously for present purposes on the basis of that safeguarding constraint, that's the sole reason that they're struck out effectively, even though the essay otherwise acknowledges that the sites promoted for employment provision adjoining Manor Royal, including Jersey Farm, are otherwise represent more sustainable locations. And similarly, so in relation to the route and alignment of the multimodal link, the need for it to be assessed in relation to the removal of a safeguarding constraint would have assisted, we say, a more focused route. So point to come on to later, the master plan that the Gatwick Airport Limited relies so heavily upon, the 2019 master plan, which shows that safeguarding area, we say shouldn't be determinative. I won't get into the detail of that now. You'll be aware of this from our written submissions. And that's largely because of changes in circumstances that have arisen, and again we'll come back to that. But therefore what the appraisal needed was to include an assessment without safeguarding and as to the necessary extent of safeguarding, because what we see is a different approach for Gatwick Green EC4, potentially some of the multimodal route alignment sites than in relation to other sites that are before you in relation to potential employment land. Is there anything else? But that's it, so in a short.
Thank you. So I'm clear on Ardmore's position. It's the case that the sustainability appraisal has considered the Jersey Farm site. It's how the appraisal process has approached it. And what do you say to the submissions I've heard from Mr. Forstick on behalf of the Borough Council, that there is a legitimate approach to having this kind of initial, I'll call it initial sieving exercise, based in this instance on the safeguarding. If we find that the safeguarding approach is sound and is justified, does it therefore still follow that there's still an issue with sustainability appraisal, or does it require actually we need to, as inspectors, arrive at a different conclusion on the soundness of the safeguarding issue, and then that would then stimulate or require looking again at sustainability appraisal?
So I think if it, can I try and do it this way, if you were to conclude that the safeguarding was required in national policy, such that in those circumstances, I wouldn't be saying that the sustainability appraisal had missed something material. But what we've got here is a council that says, well, it is required, except for where we'd like to do something else, and that's the fundamental concern with what's gone on here.
But just so I'm clear, if we find there is an issue, a soundness issue, is there any dispute that going to slip into these planning planning acronyms, that the sustainability appraisal in itself is repairable through the examination process? Yeah.
It's a soundness point rather than any fundamental legal flaw, as it were.
It's not the case that the council's kind of totally. To pick up Mr. Forsdick's point earlier, totally missed or totally not gone there. It has, but you have issue with the approach and what the judgments applied, which obviously we'll come on to tomorrow in terms of Gatwick. Okay, that's helpful. Mr. Forsdick.
We understand Mr. Keen's point on behalf of Ardmore, but we think there's, and our whole case actually is based on the fundamental premise of there being just a fundamental distinction between land that's critical for the southern runway and land that we say on the evidence isn't critical, and that's why we can justify a different approach for Gatwick Green, for example, to the area north of Manor Royal, because on any view, the land north of Manor Royal is critical to the southern runway. A point was made by Mr. Keane that this might be relevant for later on, it might be for now, but it was said that we're moving the boundary for the link road, and that's not correct. We're providing an area of search that goes into the safeguarding land or possibly goes into the safeguarded land on a temporary basis. So we haven't moved it for the link road. We're looking to maybe put a road there on a temporary basis if it's necessary to do so within the safeguarded land.
I appreciate we're obviously going to come into some of these matters in more detail as the examination proceeds. I think obviously today's session on legal compliance is obviously whether the approach to the sustainability appraisal meets the various regulatory requirements, including those of strategic environmental assessment. I appreciate there's an element of overlap. These issues are often interlinked, but I think I'm just mindful, obviously this morning we don't get into sort of too much detail debate about potentially other soundness issues that this examination obviously needs to come on to and look at in more detail in subsequent sessions. But I see, Mr. Keane, that has prompted you to further thought submission.
So it's actually just to respond briefly, if I may, to a point Mr. Forsdick made, and I hope I do it in the sense of a point of clarification more than anything else, and it may be that I didn't put this very well a few moments ago. There is a distinction, as I understand it, in relation to what's proposed for Gatwick Green EC4, which is removal from the safeguarding area, and the approach to the Western Link Road, where, as I understand the plan, it's not said that land is needed to be removed because there's an area of search, and the way that it's put is that overlaps with safeguarding, but that where that goes when you read the various options is that might then involve, depending on alignment selected, encroachment into, and therefore to that extent removal from. So I don't want to, take a big point about it, but that's the reason for the distinction of approach. I think it might be worth just making that clear at this stage, because it does seem to me the council applies a different label, as it were, potentially to what's going on with the link road as opposed to the EC4 allocation.
Thank you for that. And in terms of other submissions on the sustainability appraisal, Mr. North, I think on behalf of your clients, you've made submissions on this point.
Yes, I have, sir. Thank you very much. My clients, as you probably know, sir, are one of the largest distributors of holiday products in this country, both on and off airport car parking, hotels and lounges. So they have a particular interest, and I'm sorry to sort of concentrate on two policies because that's where their interest lies, and that's where the points I'd like to raise on the essay, and in particular your 3 points, 1.16, 1.17, 1.19 lie. Firstly, there's two policies obviously that they are concerned about, and here I'm only going to concentrate on the points that you raise in those 3 paragraphs under issue 5. The first point is that it is relating to policy EC7, so that's the hotel and visitor accommodation policy. And it seems to me that the critical issue there is the sequential test, putting it bluntly, and whether that is being met in all the various options that are being looked at in EC7. What my clients feel, sir, when looking at the options on EC7 is that there's been some sort of conflation between what is effectively sequential testing and what you would say is a more broader sustainable location approach. And that has to be seen, we say, or my clients say, in the sense that the key issue here is to ensure the vibrant reinvigoration, sustainable economic future of the town centre, to produce what they say is qualitative developments, which my clients would totally accord with. But when you look at the two options 1 and option 3 of policy EC7, you'll note that reference is made primarily to what I would call the broader aspects of sustainable development, sustainable locations, as opposed to sequential testing. And I think that is not properly reflected in the reasonable alternatives relating to EC7. The other point relating to EC7, so relates to the input in the policy to GAT3 and parking at the airport. There's a clear infusion of that policy, GAT3, into the issues relating to EC7. And you see that, so with respect to on-airport car parking, in which on-airport car parking is required to meet a demonstrable need by virtue of what is said in the policy EC7, that it must meet GAT3. For an on-airport applicant to meet GAT3, the demonstrable need, is flawed in our view, for the simple reason being that car parking on airport does not require planning permission. It's permitted development in whatever form, whether it's a multi-storey car park, block parking or surface car parking. So you have a policy which effectively states that in terms of on-airport hotel development, it has to meet a demonstrable need in terms of GAT3, but that's through permitted development rights anyway. You don't need it. So question, what's the purpose of having a demonstrable need for on-airport hotels? The other point really relates to the question of off-airport hotels, where the requirement, it seems to me, reading the policy, is that there should be no block parking, as that sort of, if I can use a term, gives the game away that off-airport car parking has taken place. If there is no if there is no block car parking, there is no requirement that a person staying in that hotel and using a surface car park would not want to go to the airport. And these are very important issues as I see it, particularly when you consider that we're at a crossroads with respect to DCO application with respect to the Northern Runway. We have issues on that, which we will be raising at that inquiry, relating to car parking. And we have issues there which have considerable uncertainties as to how much and where it's going to be provided. And that, in our view, requires, in this local plan, if you are to take into account the fact that it should take into account the development of the second runway, this local plan should also bear in mind the uncertainties that causes. That has impacts on GAT3, it has impacts on a whole series of policies, including EC7. The other point that I'd like to raise is on GAT3. GAT3, and here I'm concentrating on the 3 points, not whether it's right or wrong, but the fact of the matter is that GAT3 also includes within its 2 options effectively a development which is additional air car parking with the airport boundary, or to allow car park within the airport boundary and outside the airport boundary if there's a demonstrable need. Again, it goes back to the same point. The provisions of Schedule 2, Part 8, Class F of the GPDO actually allow the airport authority to provide on airport car parking on operational land without the need for plan permission. And so where is the demonstrable need requirement in those circumstances? It doesn't seem to me to be a valid requirement or a reasonable requirement, should I say, if you're looking at providing or having to provide a demonstrable need when there's permitted development rights. It doesn't make much sense to me. It seems to me that the policy in that respect is a policy which effectively prohibits to a large extent off-airport car parking, prohibits choice in that respect too. What I would be saying to you is this, that it seems to me if we had an option which effectively goes down the line and says, well, you should provide additional replacement airport parking within the airport boundary, but in terms of providing it outside the airport boundary, you'd have to show a demonstrable need. That seems to be a reasonable alternative, accepting, of course, that in the airport you wouldn't have to show that for the reasons I've just said. It goes to the same issue with respect to hotels. Hotels effectively, or the hotel option in the SA, does not include an option which actually states, well, in terms of hotel accommodation, it should be provided solely in connection with a sequential test. It doesn't say that. And moreover, if there was, again, it goes back to the issue of reasonable alternatives. If there was an option which permitted hotel and visitor accommodation on airport, here we're talking sequentially, is it really, from a sequential, not a sustainable point, is it sequentially an off or out of town centre location? It seems to me it very much is. You could say, and I accept, there are arguments to say, well, it's sustainable, but that's not the test. If there was an option which permitted hotel and visitor accommodation on the airport, but only in circumstances where a demonstrable need is shown for the hotel, not for the car parking to get to with it, and where there are no other more sequentially preferable locations, that would be a reasonable alternative. It's not opening the doors. It seems to me that hasn't been, as I see it, considered in the formulation of the various options. I haven't, like you said, read 800 pages of the essay, but I have a client who is particularly interested in 2 aspects of it, and unfortunately we tend to have our representations nuanced in that respect. Thank you.
No, I understand, and obviously we'll come on to have separate kind of discussions on policies EC7 and GAT3, but from what I interpret from reading your submissions is the issue with SA is whether it's looked at in your submissions the appropriate spectrum of reasonable alternatives and considered and tested those in terms of formulating the policy approach. That there's been other policy options that I think in your view have not been looked at and tested.
That's correct, in the context of reasonable alternatives, and in the context of what, particularly in EC7, the fundamental part should be in accordance with both government policy and the MPPG, of the importance to be attached to the sequential approach. That seems to be a highly relevant factor to take into account consideration in any SA or sustainability appraisal relating to visitor and hotel accommodation. My grouse, as Mr. Forsey will know, that is this whole idea of demonstrable need on an airport, which doesn't have to prove any demonstrable need. You can do it anyway. For car parking, I'm talking then, I accept in hotels, permissive development rights do not apply to the airport to allow a hotel to be built under permissive development rights.
Thank you. If I can turn to the Borough Council, as I say, wasn't anticipating today to kind of get into detailed merits of policy, but in terms of the general approach of sustainability appraisal, noting your submission earlier, Mr. Forsdick, about kind of this, I call it sieving approach. Apologies if that's too crude an assessment. But if you're in a pool of kind of looking at reasonable alternatives, does the Borough Council have anything you wish to say in terms of what I'm being presented with this morning, in terms of there are reasonable alternatives that have been omitted and not looked at as part of SA?
Yes, we have got something to say. The reasonable alternatives have been looked at, as a matter of fact. The real question is whether there's a legal flaw in the choice of reasonable alternatives. So has the council missed out something that it had to, a reasonable alternative that it had to look at? And as I said earlier, it doesn't have to delve down into sub-options or sub-permutations.
But they have to be, so in the council, they have to be distinctly different.
Distinctly different to allow you to judge the environmental. The whole point is to allow you to judge which route to go down in terms of the environmental implications. So they have to be distinctly different. They have to be conceptually different. You don't have to then disaggregate them all into their constituent parts and keep on going down and down and down, which is paragraphs 37 and 42 of the Ashdown judgment. You don't. It's a matter of a judgment for the council as to how far to drill down into the options. So that's the headline legal point, if I may. In terms of EC7, the point being put, as I understand it, is that the council didn't consider the sequential, whether it should apply the sequential test to hotels. That's factually incorrect. The council, if one goes, if I could ask you please to look at page 241 of the sustainability appraisal. I'm not sure what the PDF page number is, but it's the bottom right hand corner, page 241. I would normally read it out, but it's actually helpful to see it in black and white here, I think.
Yeah, it would be the same. Is it that one? Yes.
We've put 241 into the box at the top, and it has come up with the right page. So,
maybe my creaking technology. Let's say. Nearly there. Sorry about this. Okay, 241. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what happened here was that a no policy on EC7 for hotel location, a no policy would just simply put you into the NPPF sequential test, and that's what option 1 was. So option 1 was not to include a specific policy, and if you look at the commentary right at the bottom of that page, it's identified as a main town centre use, therefore being subject to the sequential test in principle, the NPPF could guide applications for visitor accommodation effectively to the town centre locations. But of course we're living next door to Gatwick, and so a sequential town centre sequential approach was judged not acceptable precisely because of Gatwick, and therefore you look at option 2, which sets out location-specific guidance for hotels to serve Manor Royal and Gatwick Airport. And that's the justification for not adopting the sequential approach. So the very issue that's been referred to was in fact addressed. It's then said that there are no PD rights on the airport. That's true to an extent, but that's within the operational land, and the operational land and the airport boundary are not coincident. And in any event, the council is consulted on any application. So the upshot of that last point is that there's vast tracts of the airport that a planning permission does have to be applied for. And indeed, the council regularly has to deal with applications for airport parking on airport. The second point is that in any event, the council is consulted under the PD rights and fundamentally under the Section 106 obligation. And the Section 106 obligation that has stood the test of time is that the airport is allowed to provide sufficient but no more than sufficient car parking spaces. So it has to demonstrate need, and it does that as a matter of course all over the place. That's just what it does. It demonstrates need. And if the council is satisfied, then it says, okay, you can do that under the 106. And if it isn't satisfied, it says you can't. And the proof is in the pudding that there's been a lockstep between the delivery of on-airport car parking and the growth in passenger numbers. There's just been a consistent picture of the supply has kept up with the demand. So therefore, we come to gap 3, and whether one has to look at another alternative, which is to, in order to make the SA lawful, whether we have to look at another alternative, namely on airport, but if there's a need, off. And with respect to Mr. North, this is the argument that has been round the houses in at least 2 major contexts. The first is the challenge to the last local plan, which failed on exactly the same point. But I think more fundamentally on whether Gatwick meets its needs, consumes its own smoke in car parking terms, and will continue to do so. And that has been the subject of 3 major public inquiries. The most important one was the Holiday Extra inquiry, where Gatwick and the council presented, and Holiday Extras presented evidence on need and whether the airport could meet it. And there were basically fundamental findings of fact that Gatwick was and would continue to meet all its own needs.
So, Mr. Fawcett, when you say inquiry, it comes out as a planning inquiry.
A planning inquiry, section 78. So basically, there was a judicial review, that was one, and then there were 3 appeals against refusals, all on the back of a proper interpretation of GAT 3, and whether Gatwick could accommodate all its own need. And so that was the context within which the sustainability appraisal was undertaken. And if I could ask you please to look at the GAT 3 assessment, at page 252 and 253. You see the option 1 is the on-airport, which is then justified for sustainability reasons and so on, but that's one of the options. And at the end of option 1, you can see the text, the last 4 lines. The local plan approach has subsequently been successfully defended in the High Court, which is the judicial review I mentioned. I shouldn't call it a judicial review, it was a statutory challenge, but it makes no difference. And at 3 separate planning inquiries relating to the proposals for off-airport car parking. And what's that saying is that the council knows that Gatwick can meet its needs and always will be able to. And that's why the on or off, which was the next option, has been was rejected. And it's really quite telling in terms of the figures that all through all the inquiries and all through Gatwick's evidence in the DCO, it has, this will be relevant to the efficient use of land later on when we come to Gatwick Green. But at all points, Gatwick has presented copious evidence as to its ability to provide decking and technology and block parking and multi-storey car parks to make sure there isn't any need that it can't meet. And so my short point is the premise of having to consider another option of off if there's demand or if there's unmet need is based on a false premise, and therefore it's not a reasonable alternative.
Thank you. So just to summarise, I can hopefully demonstrate I understood the issues. So under both policy EC7 and GAT3, it's under option 1 in the sustainability appraisal. It's effectively a do-nothing kind of approach or option. You would leave it to national policy in effect, and I think one of the requirements of sustainability appraisal is to consider the do-nothing. You know, what do you do without a policy, a local policy intervention? Yeah, okay. I don't know, Mr. North, is there anything further you wish to come back on this particular point? Obviously, I'll be revisiting and looking at the SA again.
I don't want to go into the other issues relating to need or anything like that, but the Section 106 agreement, first of all, the May 2022 Section 106 agreement signed by the authorities, that's Crawley, West Sussex and GAL, clearly points to both on and off need. It's not purely off-on need. The second point is that the decisions which leading councils referred you to were decisions taken not in the light of the current circumstances, which relate to a DCO application for Northern Runway. That wasn't a situation in vogue at that time. And policy has in any event changed certainly over the last couple of years. So I would say that that there has been significant changes to policy generally over that time period since those decisions were issued. There were slight amendments to the options, the two options in the former plan, because it said either on airport or other places. It's not exactly the same. And the whole issue goes down to matters which relate to the ability. It may well be that consultations have to be carried out. I have no doubt about that, and I'm not challenging that. The fact is that the authority, the airport authority, have the right to construct car parks on airport without any further permission, subject to consultation. And when you look at the consultation responses, for instance, and the evidence that's presented in that consultation response, for instance, to the multi-storey car park 7, there is no demonstrable need shown there at all, because they don't need to do it. Thank you.
So, Mr. North, just so I'm clear, when you say policy has changed, I think you've referenced to the development consent order. Were there other things you have in mind when you say policy?
Yes, there was other airport-related developments, the flight to freedom, the jet to zero strategies. They weren't mentioned at that time. Matters have moved on since that day, and you see it. I mean, climate change is another issue which really wasn't. It was obviously in vogue at the time the decisions were taken, but didn't have the seriousness that it has now.
Thank you. I mean, obviously we'll come on to, as further part of principally the Gatwick discussion on tomorrow afternoon. We'll look at the plan's approach to Gatwick. Obviously we're mindful of where we are with this plan examination as a separate process to the Northern Runway project development consent order. Just on the point of kind of scoping and whether there are policy changes that I'm kind of being referred to. I mean, sustainability appraisal ordinarily has a kind of a comprehensive baseline. It looks at, or it should be looking at, all policy changes, what's national, regional or local level. Is there anything I've heard from Mr. North that kind of would indicate to the council that it hasn't appropriately scoped all kind of national policy changes?
No, the policy, the route to net zero, whatever it was called, doesn't have any implications for car parking policy or for the assessment of reasonable alternatives. That's the short point. And so whilst I've got my mic on, the DCO process that was relied on, the airport has demonstrated in its documents before the inquiry that the whole of the DCO and the millions and millions of extra passengers is only going to generate an extra need for 1,100 spaces that it hasn't already got plans for, and that those are amply and easily, readily available on just one of its existing car parks, just by decking just one of its car parks, which tells you about how the airport is able to meet demands as and when they arise.
Thank you. We'll come on to the substance of some of these matters in subsequent hearing sessions. Before I move off sustainability appraisal, are there any further or final points anybody wishes to raise in relation to the accompanying sustainability appraisal, please?
So there was one matter that raised by Gatwick, which hasn't been raised already and which we haven't had an ability to respond to, which was its suggestion that we had to look at smaller sites and not an SEL or other sites elsewhere. We'd assumed that Gatwick was going to be here today. I don't know if you want an answer from us on that point or...
That would be helpful. I mean, I was wondering whether it had some overlap with the points from Ardmore, but it's probably a slightly distinct point.
I think it might be because they talk about the ability to look at other small sites, and I think they have a table that shows that you add it all up and it comes to about the same, and therefore why don't you go for all the small sites? And the answer is that we did look at those small sites and they were rejected for various reasons, both on site-specific ones, but also on safeguarding, and also on not proper planning. And I think the phrase that my team would use is a plan of incongruous, disparate sites spread across the area. It is not remotely what the basic need is for. So that's why we reject that idea as a reasonable alternative.
And the sustainability appraisal records that kind of rejection.
It goes through each of the sites and says no for various reasons. There are different reasons for each one, but
so you have to follow through each of the sites rather than testing a kind of a cumulative or option. I see.
As the courts tell us, we have to read the documents fairly and as a whole, rather than just pick out odd sentences, which is, I think, that may well be why Gad isn't here today, because they realise that the point doesn't go anywhere once you read it fairly and as a whole.
Thank you for that. Okay, there is just a further couple of points in terms of legal compliance matters, which I'd like to just very quickly cover this morning. Just very briefly in terms of it's our agenda item 4.2 on climate change, which is obviously an increasingly significant issue. We have a separate responsibility under Section 19 of the Act to report on this. And our MIQ 1114 raised this issue. Obviously, we'll be looking at individual policies more when we go on, I think, to the Part 2 hearings in January, but I think we would afford the Council if there's anything further that it wishes to say in relation to climate change. I think we're obviously mindful the Borough Council has its own climate strategy, emergency action plan. As I give the Council a further opportunity. Is there anything you wish to add to what we raised in matter question 114?
Yeah. So as set out in our response to your questions 114, 115. So that's in the council's written statement, CBC MIQ 001 pages 22 to 26. We believe we've fully complied with the requirements of the Climate Change Act 2008 and the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. So paragraph 1.14.3 sets out the policies in the submission local plan, so the May 23 plan, which are designed to ensure that development and use of land contributes to the mitigation of and adaptation to climate change. In addition, we've submitted topic paper 6, which is specifically relates to climate change and how the local plan addresses those issues, and that's document reference DS/TP06, and that provides a lot more detail about how the plan addresses the climate change through those particular policies. In addition, the sustainability appraisal includes key sustainability objectives, which are particularly concerned with climate change mitigation and adaptation, and that's particularly objectives 1, 2, 6 and 7 in the essay document. And also in the essay, same in the sustainability appraisal document, topic areas A, E and F pages start page 119, 160 and 171. They provide the baseline information, trends, plans, policies and programmes which inform the local plan in its efforts to address climate change, adaptation and mitigation. And then finally, just in terms of monitoring the local plan, we set out in the monitoring implementation framework how that is linked to the sustainability objective indicators, and that approach has been taken with the adopted local plan, and the results are published at least annually in the Council's Authorities Monitoring Report. And as you mentioned, the local plan itself links to the Council's own climate change strategy.
Thank you for that. And you referenced our MIQ, it's 115, was around the strategic flood risk assessment update. That's now been provided to the examination. We have got some supplementary questions. We've issued supplementary questions on that. Without prejudging the Council's response to that, I mean, is it fair to say it will be a matter for sustainability appraisal to look at or consider whether there are any implications from the updated strategic flood risk assessment, particularly in relation to the site allocation process?
No, I don't think. I can pass back to Anthony.
Okay. Hi there. Sorry, my name is Anthony Masson. I'm a senior planning officer at the Council. Yeah, we've reviewed the various different sites through updating the SFRA. What that's shown is essentially it's not bringing any new sites into areas of excuse me, flood risk. So whilst we had sites that had already been assessed through the essay that had an element of flood risk on them, it's the flood risk on those has changed very marginally, but not to the extent that the EA the Environment Agency is concerned about it. So we're not anticipating it to essentially require us to review again.
Thank you for that. I've got nothing further I wish to raise in relation to climate change in terms of what's already comprehensively been provided. Just then moving on to item 4.3 of the agenda, habitat regulations assessments. Again, we've raised a couple of questions on this. We've got the responses to that. I think from everything we've read, I don't think the relevant authorities, particularly the Natural England or the Environment Agency, have raised any concerns around the habitat regulation assessment process. Obviously, we've got the additional note. Is it from do you pronounce it Lepus? Lepus. Okay. I think one of the things we probably just want to check in with, and it'll be probably again come up on matter 8 on Thursday, is whether there are any further implications from the ongoing work around water neutrality that may require revisiting or looking again at habitat regulation assessment findings, or whether we're being too precautionary.
Yeah, in terms of the habitat regulations assessment, yes, that was undertaken by our consultants for us. What they they found was that obviously through the screening and the scoping without any mitigation, that there were some concerns, particularly and not just related solely to water neutrality, also transport issues in terms of the Ashdown Forest. However, when the policies in the local plan that seek to mitigate against those impacts are included through the appropriate assessment, then they effectively mean that there would be no harm from the Crawley Borough local plan. So yes, the habitat regulations assessment is open until the point of adoption of the local plan, because the mitigation requirements are through the policies coming forward in the local plan.
Thank you for that. If there's nothing further in relation to the habitat regulations assessment, if I can then move on to item, I think it's agenda item 4, Roman numeral 4, and then it's potential modifications that arise in relation specifically to this matter. There are a couple that I want to pick up just now to just confirm the approach, and it's in relation to, I think, sort of broadly put it under sort of plan making, is the kind of the distinction between strategic policies and non-strategic policies. I think the council's Matter 1 statement has helpfully clarified that the tree replacement standards policy would not be a strategic policy, but that the policy SD4 on water neutrality would be a strategic policy. Obviously the council's modifications doesn't distinguish. I think those are two things we would need to recommend as main modifications. So that's the start of our note for main modifications. Those, so DD4 would not be a strategic policy and SDC4 would be a strategic policy. I think that's something that needs to be consulted on. And then allied to plan making, whilst it's not our role as examining inspectors to look at the soundness or otherwise of the policies map, clearly there are interrelationships between what's in the plan and what will form the updated adopted policies map. And my understanding is that the council has agreed, or is agreeing in terms of the representations raised by West Sussex County Council to show, is it the brick clay resources consultation zone? So that would be a change to the policies map. And then this is where I'm potentially going to get confused, but not to show the buffer around the safeguarded railhead on the Manor Royal estates, yes. Manor Royal industrial area, is that correct?
Yes, I can just clarify that point. West Sussex County Council fully supports safeguarding of the, it's the Crawley Goods Yard railhead. We're recommending that the buffer is taken off the policies map, so it's in accordance with the safeguarded site as shown in our policies map 7, which is referred to in policy M10 of the Joint Minerals Local Plan. In terms of the concerns raised about the buffer, we have a separate mineral consultation layer which we issue to all the district and boroughs, which does have the 250-metre buffer, and that triggers any consultations adjacent to safeguarded sites, and that mechanism has been working effectively.
So in terms of the policies map, why does it now need to be removed? Because obviously we've got representations from CEMEX and other operators who think that's potentially quite a beneficial thing to show on the policies map for Crawley.
To ensure it's consistent with our policies map 7 in the Joint Minerals Local Plan, which just shows the site itself, it doesn't have the buffer.
So how do people know about the buffer if it's not shown? Is it in your policy?
It's a data layer that we issue to all the district and boroughs, and it ensures that we can update it annually if there's any changes, any new sites that are brought in, and it is shown in our minerals minerals and waste safeguarding guidance.
So, sorry, a question to Crawley then. Does that then come up on your sort of your local list when
so
schemes are coming in?
For development management, when they when an application comes in, they would pull up the map that they would keep internally, which would show who they have to consult for what applications.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Rollings reminded me of one further thing. It is in relation to plan making, and it's probably a follow-up to our MIQ 1.5. Apologies, this wasn't specifically identified on the agenda, but I'll raise it now and see what the Borough Council says. I think we just wanted clarity on the actual plan period. We understand it's to 2040, but we can interpret two ways where it may start from, whether it's 2023, so 1st of April 2023, or 1st of April 2024.
Yes, we'd identified that the plan period would be from the plan's adoption. So essentially to ensure that we had at least 15 years from adoption, which is why we went from 2024 to 2040, which actually gives a 16-year plan period. However, the baseline data for the base date for the housing trajectory and the employment land trajectory were of the 31st of March, which would essentially allow the plan to start from the 1st of April as its date. However, 2023. However, as part of responses to the next set of MIQ questions for the stage 2, we were considering providing some updated information, particularly in relation to the housing and the land trajectories, which would have a later base date, so i.e. December 2023. So the plan period, I think we are saying, is 2024, 25 to 2039 to 40, with the sort of the information and the data coming forward this year.
If I'm not saying this is where we're going to go, but if there was a view that we felt for soundness, the plan period should start from the 1st of April 2023, because that's when the plan was submitted in July 23. You were able to submit it with base data for that time. Does the council have any kind of initial reaction to that? I mean, I understand probably one of the initial consequences would be obviously the housing requirement would increase by another year. That's the way I interpret the figures in policy H1 of.
Yes, but the housing trajectory stretches it from 2023, so it wouldn't cause us significant issues. We'd be comfortable with that.
Thank you. No, I entirely take the point that, and this doesn't always happen in plan examinations, you are actually planning for at least a 15-year time horizon on plan adoption. So I understand that end of the spectrum. I think it's just being clear on the start of the plan period. I think, as I see here now, I think my inclination or preference would be to 1st of April 2023 to time with the point of plan submission. And we'd probably just need to work through whether that does have any ramifications for specific figures within the plan.
We can certainly work up the figures and have them ready either for the January sessions or a time before that,
Yep.
the December 15 date, if that's helpful.
Okay, I think my only. I mean, it's on the one hand, it's impressive if the council can kind of do almost live monitoring and kind of see where we are at various points. I'm sort of slightly apprehensive about kind of taking monitoring points partway through the year, if that's what's being suggested. I mean, there's a kind of probably prefer a consistency point,
The figures for the 31st of March include the data we get from the County Council, so yeah, we would be comfortable to keep that data if that's where.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got no further questions in relation to legal compliance. Are there any further final points people wish to make before I close this morning's session? No? Wow, work to time, 1 o'clock. That doesn't always happen. Can I thank in particular the adjoining authorities who came at our request? I've appreciated your contributions to the this morning's discussion. We'll now take the lunchtime adjournment and we'll be reconvening back in this room at 2 o'clock, and it will be for firstly matter 2, which will be looking at the spatial strategy, and then the best way to end a Tuesday afternoon looking at housing numbers for matter 3. So hopefully see some of you again for this afternoon session. Thank you.